Was it wrong for us architects to lose that dream, to lose that ideal that we can never achieve?
On the one hand, architects wanting to propose a utopia, be creative, and ask society for permission to be geniuses. Can we address non-specific problems and challenges, the ones that are relevant and interesting to the society at large, but as architects, enter those and address them through the specific knowledge of architecture?
Where the power resides in the architect now, is it in the creativity role or in the, let's say, as a mediator between all those factors?
Well, I would say the more complex the problem, the more the needs for synthesis. And I think I said something like, to design is to prefer. What is life? Is vital signs? Do I breathe? Do I have a pulse? Or is also the fears, the expectations, the desire? It's a jump into the unknown that you have to do. And that's a very big difference. I mean, fight the cliche. Don't answer to new questions with already proven answers. It's unacceptable that people, and I felt very familiar there, it looked like Latin America. No access to basic needs, water, sewage, the smell, kids playing with the garbage, rats around. I mean,
and we need to act now.
We need to act now.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Sfera Podcast, a meeting place for local and globally renowned creatives dedicated to enhancing our living spaces. Sfera Podcast serves as a dedicated platform for engaging discussions about architecture's role as a mechanism for social change and its profound influence on shaping our societies. Today, we found ourselves in Novi Sad, a city in Serbia where over 1,000 local European and internationally acclaimed creatives have gathered for the 6th Kaleidoscope of Culture. During this event, we had the privilege to talk with Chilean architect Alejandro Aravena. The visionary behind the do tank firm Elemental, Aravena emerges as a standout figure among architects deeply committed to social cause, a connection recognized by his receipt of esteemed Pritzker Prize. Aravena's foremost mission as an architect is to elevate the overall quality of people's lives. He achieves this by meticulously evaluating social necessities, human aspirations, and taking into account the complex interplay of political, economic, and environmental factors. Welcome to the Sphere. Mr. Aravena, welcome to Sphere.
Thank you.
And also to Serbia.
Thank you too.
Since we don't have a lot of time, the schedule is tight. I'm just going to start asking you with the first question. Since you visited for the first time Novi Sad, and as I heard, Belgrade too, both of the cities are strongly influenced by a modernist architectural movement during the socialist era in the former Yugoslavia. Our region, in a way, moved away from those ideals, and we're still trying to adapt to new circumstances. But however, I think we can also consider this crisis through a global perspective. It seems we lost, as a society, we lost the dream, we lost the utopia. So my question is there any utopia or collective dream that remains relevant for architects today globally?
I would say it's extremely necessary it to be. What I would remove from your sentence is the word architecture, and eventually the word utopia too. What I think we desperately need is a collective shared narrative. What the cohesion of a society depends on the shared values. And what we see and suffer actually pretty much all over in the world is a value connected to consumerism, where you are somebody the moment you have things. Actually, there's an expression in English, the haves and the have-nots, meaning if you don't have, then you're nobody. the word in English belongings, a noun in the plural, the more belongings you have, then the more valuable you are. But what if you belong to that part of the society that was left out of the opportunities of access to jobs, education, and particularly living in cities where the inequalities or the field is so unleveled that you will never, ever be able to have those belongings? Then what we're witnessing, particularly in Latin America, is a huge pressure to prove that you are somebody, meaning belongings. But if you're not going to achieve that through your own work, then you steal or you use violence to have the same thing. So one strategy, or particularly coming from the right, is repression, so that those that have can protect their belongings, and those that don't have will have to live with that. But what if we're able to create an alternative narrative, meaning that the set of values according to which you are somebody that is appreciated by society is not only based on belongings? And we have witnessed in some of the projects that we have done that range from the Mapuche group in the south of Chile to some very well-organized communities where the word belongings, a noun in the plural, has been changed by the word belonging, a verb. Mm-hmm. What a complete different world would it be if the reason why you are a valuable human being is because you are belonging to a community. Then you understand your role in society. What are you doing? What is expected from you? What can you expect from society that is a complete alternative? I wouldn't like to call it utopia because by definition that means that it will never exist. But I would say that cities have a powerful shortcut to create that feeling of belonging. Mm-hmm. We come to cities because we live together, concentrated in space, having access to opportunities. And even though cities at the same time are the expression of the lack of that common purpose, they may also offer at least the physical place where that narrative can appear. And that will come from culture, not from architecture. May come from filmmaking, from sports, from music. We need desperately role models that are an alternative to the Kim Kardashians of the world or to the narcos of the world.
Yeah, the reason why I mentioned utopia is because it seems to me, at least, that we gave up, you mentioned, because that the dream is unattainable. We can never achieve a utopia. But then you also said we have to aspire from some kind of ideal. So was it wrong for us architects to lose that dream, to lose that ideal that we can never achieve? How can we aspire towards something if we don't have that goal?
Unfortunately, I may have to give a long answer to your short question. Okay. And the mistake, I would say, was that architects thought that they could be the ones that create that path, or that the model or the way to achieve that may come from architecture. That's so completely wrong. The origin of that may be in the late 60s or around that area, where a conversation with Hashim Sarkis, that was the curator of the Venice Biennale. Today, he's the dean of MIT. We were teaching together at Harvard in the early 2000s. And the conversation we had, he described the world in the late 60s as being in front of a forking path. On the one hand, architects wanting to not only follow, but actually propose a utopia, be creative, and ask society for permission to be geniuses. Society gave those architects the permission to make their imagination fly free. The price they paid was irrelevance, because they used the specific knowledge of architecture, which is to do projects, to address problems that only interest other architects. So the specific knowledge of architecture was used to address specific knowledge that nobody else cares about. And actually the way you speak about them only is understood by other architects. And so it's irrelevance as the side effect. On the other path, were those architects that understood that the non-specific problems of society, poverty, inequalities, violence, underdevelopment, whatever, you name it, where you don't have to be an expert. Every citizen in the society can have a say around the non-specific problems. The cost of the price that was paid was to abandon the specific knowledge of architecture, which is to do projects. And those architects became consultants, experts, working for institutions that write endless reports and diagnoses, but never ever organize their information in a proposal key. So the challenge is, can we address non-specific problems and challenges, the ones that are relevant and interesting to the society at large, but as architects, enter those and address them through the specific knowledge of architecture. So we start from non-specific problems, make them go through our specific knowledge, that's how we contribute to them, but then we bring it back to society so that society says if it's okay or not. And this is may be the challenge ahead, and that's what we didn't do before. That may have been we make the wrong turn in those forking paths some decades ago.
Yeah, but we will have now a chance to take the right turn in a way.
At least we have the knowledge, and we can't claim ignorance as we didn't know. Now we know.
Yeah. That's really connects to the other question. Let's take a moment to go back 2 days ago when you came to Serbia and you visited Veliki Rit, the local settlement here in the neighborhood of Novi Sad. And you had a chance to talk to the local community and to the people in their pressing issues. So after that visit, you had a small lecture, which is really cozy one, and people asked you really good questions. I was there and I listened, and I caught in a moment that you made a connection in a triad between power, the state, the problem or the task, which are the people in need, and the architect, which is the man who needs to give the solution to that society, to that community. So the question is, where the power resides in the architect now? Is it in the creativity role, or in the as a mediator between all those factors, or in the building itself?
The act of building itself.
Yeah, the act of building.
Well,
itself.
I would say the more complex the problem, the more the need for synthesis.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And if there's any power in architecture, in design, that's the power of synthesis. The way it works is that you identify the forces at play that will inform the form of a project. Because in the end, what we do is we give form to the places where people live. Architecture is not more complicated than that, but also not easier than that. Give form to the places where people live. The moment you double click on each of those words, form, what informs the form? The environment, economics, politics, the social movements, aesthetics, well, all of them. And those forces eventually pull in opposite directions, so they're contradictory. Form to the places, the range of places. Everything inevitably has to have a form. From this building, from the housing, from the public space, to the sidewalk, to the curb of the sidewalk. Somebody has to decide the form. And with that, you can improve or you can ruin people's quality of life. And then the last one, where people live. What is life? Is vital signs? Do I breathe? Do I have a pulse? Or is also the fears, the expectations, the desire, the emotions, the symbolic values, the range that life is composed by is so complex that, again, you understand that it's a complex question that requires synthesis. And synthesis requires that you establish priorities. It's not everything, but you have to understand which are the most relevant. It's not reductive. The moment you begin to take things out, then of course you can produce things, but they're not going to address all the issues. They're going to address just some of them. So it's not a reduction of them. But if we don't synthesize, the amount of information may paralyze you. So you have to be able to organize that information in a proposal key. It's a jump into the unknown that you have to do. And that's a very big difference with consultants, that you take the risk of proposing. It may not work at first. Well, then you're correct. That's why participatory design makes a change.
Of course.
Then going there, you could tell from the experience, an emotional, physical experience there, that there's an urgent matter that needs to be solved. It's unacceptable that people, and I felt very familiar there, it looked like Latin America. No access to basic needs, water, sewage, the smell, kids playing with the garbage, rats around. I mean,
and we need to act now.
We need to act now. And even though it was a very, and what I understood in the conversation afterwards, where even city officials were explaining why does it make it so difficult. Well, all those difficulties are the terms of the equation that need to be addressed, are part of the forces at play. They are not the reasons for why not doing it. They are exactly the constraints that you need to integrate to do something. But out of those constraints, again, you need to establish what is more hierarchical, what comes first, what can then in a secondary place, because your optimums are going to be relative, not absolute. Then the role of the architect may be to organize all that information, because at some point you have to break the circle. Mm-hmm. It is so complex that you have the perfect excuse, but yet people don't want to be held, they want to stay invisible. That's universal. Pretty much everywhere in the world, informal settlements are at the same time a need for help. But the moment you accept that help, then your situation of being illegal, being an immigrant, or makes you become vulnerable. Yet, at some point, it has to become a change. So the physical transformation is the start. Other professions may start from the social aid, from political decisions, from funding and financing. I think our role as architects is maybe not provide the solution, but at least contribute what other professions can't do. And we do have, going back again, we can give form to those places where people live, and through them channel the different types of knowledge that the difficult questions require to be solved properly.
One last question for the end, talking about the synthesis and the architectural process. You once described architectural process, if I'm correct me if I'm wrong, endless loop of decision making and testing the validity of those decisions. But it's also fascinating to me that once you make a decision, you create a new problem. And we can see that especially with rapid development of technologies is what's going on in the world. That has a really big global impact. So my last question is, since we are a local podcast for architects, and hopefully the world is going to hear now, we describe this let's say movement as a mechanism for social change. So what kind of advice would you give to young local architects all across the world who are facing struggles but are determined to contribute to positive social change within their environments?
More than an advice that I would say I wouldn't dare to do so, I would prefer to say what has worked for us at Elemental. And going back to your question, I think I said something like, to design is to prefer. And there's people that prefer better than others. So the first thing that has worked for me is to look at those that prefer better. And that means to be as nerd as possible and go to work on the footsteps of the blank page that you can kind of reverse design to understand what were the key design decisions that Brunelleschi took, or Louis Kahn took, or Phidias took. That's why what worked for me, I understood I was awfully late in that body of knowledge that had been accumulated, and the nerdiest you were, the more you have chances to walk on the footsteps of those that know how to prepare better. So I was designing and I was measuring buildings. The moment you measure, you are on the same moment of those forking paths where at every given turn you can make the wrong decision. But you learn just by intuitively knowing, okay, this guy had to choose round or square, high or tall, what material, what's the distance between columns, what's the size of a room. So over and over and over, and then you get something from that nerdy approach. The other side of the coin that has worked for me, once you've charged your designer tools or enlarge your toolbox, be rebellious. I mean, fight the cliche. Don't answer to new questions with already proven answers because they may not work. If they work, fine. You lose it. You gain and save a lot of energy, a lot of time. So don't innovate for the sake of innovating. But the moment you pay careful attention to the question you are being asked, it's unlikely that it's something that happened before. So you will be always on the steep part of the learning curve, and some rebellious attitude, which are forces that in principle go in opposite directions. Because on the one hand, you're obedient, you study rigorously the operations that have been developed before you, but at the same time, you want to fight that cliche. If you're able to balance, at least what has happened for us is that we've been able to use common sense, try to address common good, and at the same time approach it in a way that had not been done before. It may not be rocket science, but sometimes improvements come, in very tiny moves. And yeah, if you're not afraid of going into battles or matches that are won by a very tight margin, 51 to 49. I mean, it's not a huge gain. Sometimes you have to live with the good enough. Then I guess that you have more chances at least to deal with the questions where there's more risk, that have less chances to be solved. And because of that, where you may have more impact and then feel that you're doing more relevant stuff.
For the end, I would like to thank you for this opportunity and to give you a small present and just end. It's a book from our famous writer, Nobel Prize winner Ivo Andrić, and I'm just gonna end with one small quote about bridges. This is a book about bridges, his most famous work. Of all that humans instinctively build and create, nothing in my eyes is better and more valuable than bridges. They are more important than houses, holier, more universal than temples. They belong to everyone and are equal to everyone. Useful, always, purposeful, erected at the intersection of the greatest number of human needs. More enduring than other structures and serve nothing that is secret or evil. Thank you for building bridges between Chile and Serbia and for coming.
Interestingly enough, the last project I will show today is a bridge.
Yeah, we know.
And of course, from architectural school in Belgrade, there's a Serbian architectural journal, and there's your project in that edition.
Is that so? Wow.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.